Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are joined by a good friend and a brilliant mind today, Dr. Michael Paul Masters. He is the professor of biological anthropology at Montana University. He's also an esteemed author and speaker and just a cool guy. He's the kind of guy you want to chat with and pick his brain because it is extensive what he knows. And he has a very eloquent way of getting points across, not scared to say it how it is. He's our kind of guy. So thank you all for joining us today. We'll see you in just a minute here with this week's episode of Quantum Ladder Podcast. Welcome back to Quantum Ladder Podcast. My name is Louis Borges. Joining me as always, my good friend and co-host, Mr. Marquise Williams. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. As always, ready to get this show on the road, man. This is going to be
Absolutely,
fun.
yeah. Doctor's in the house today. We seem to have luck and the fortune of these brilliant minds that want to come spend some time with us to chat. So either we're doing something right or they're just really nice people. Either way, I'm good with it. I'm not going to ask too many questions. So we are very happy to have our good friend, Dr. Michael Paul Masters, on the show. We want to sort of get into the world of evolution, biology. You know, is it genes adapting or is it culture and society adapting that's really driving the change from where we are now compared to where we were 10,000 years ago as a species? We're also going to pick his brain about some UAP related things. He is a strong proponent and has some big opinions, and we want to hear them all. So, with that, we're going to welcome our good friend and today's guest, Dr. Michael Paul Masters. Welcome to the show.
Hello, good to see you fellas again. I think last time we did this was on Dave Scott's show.
It was a panel, I believe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was fun.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
fun.
It was
Yeah.
fun. That was a good time. Always
It's
a
always
good
good.
time. I
It's
might
always good
send
to
him
have
a
a format
screenshot
where. Go
when
ahead.
we're talking about him.
Yeah, yeah. It's always good. Always good to have a format where you can get multiple opinions on the show at once. That's why we like doing it this
Yeah.
way. You know, we bring something up, and it's like, "What do you think? What do you think?" And none of us know for sure anything, but we're curious. So is our audience. And I mean, we're not PhD scientists like yourself. We're just a couple of guys that are really interested in these topics. So we do our best to bring the sharpest minds to the table, and then the audience can kind of make their own opinion and go from there. So for
Yeah.
anyone who doesn't
Well,
know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into the specific line of work that you're doing today.
Well, it's kind of a long, convoluted story, but I sort of allude to some of it in the first two books I wrote, Identified Flying Objects and the Extra-Tempestrial Model. About how when I was a kid, I looked up and saw Whitley Strieber's book on the living room shelf. My biological father had a UFO encounter before I was born, but overheard him talking about it and then saw this book and then sort of had this vision of early hominin, chimpanzee-like form, a modern human, and then this archetypal gray alien on the cover of Whitley's book. And yeah, sort of a flash of awareness or questions entered my mind, and it's just been all downhill from there.
That's one way to
So
put it.
let's get right into it. My biggest curiosity is about the origins of life. We recently interviewed Avi Loeb and Dr. Lawrence Krauss, and everybody has their own opinion. You know, science and academia as a whole seems to go back to that the Miller-Urey experiment, sort of that everything came out of this primordial soup, quote unquote. So I'm curious to
Yeah.
get your thoughts on the origins of life.
Well, I mean, it's probably simpler than we think. Really, the fact that we had life pretty much as soon as we had an atmosphere, liquid water, and the whole Earth's not just liquid hot magma. It arose, so it sort of indicates. I talk about this in my class a lot when we go through the long history, 3.8 billion year history of life on this planet, that there's probably life on other planets too, because it did happen so fast here once you had those basic requirements for life. But yeah, I mean, it probably started with RNA. It's a simpler form of DNA. Every living life form has DNA as the coding system for base pairs, A, T, C, G, which indicates common ancestry. Obviously, we all evolved from the same early organisms, prokaryotes, around 3.8 billion years ago. And there might have been other iterations of life before, but maybe it didn't survive. But whatever happened 3.8 billion years ago did, and every living being today is the direct descendant of those early protozoan forms. So yeah, as far as how it happened, I don't know. I mean, it seems like, improbable for things just to come together in the right way. But if you have a long enough time, you have the right conditions, maybe it's also inevitable. There's some interesting ideas about thermodynamics and entropy, because life is an entropy reducer. So maybe there's some aspect of that involved with radiation from the sun. And I don't know. It's not, my expertise goes back 6 to 8 million years. 3.8 billion is really somebody else's job, because you got to draw the line somewhere,
Yeah.
It's a lot of time.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting beginning to this conversation. So when thinking about the idea of the origin of life and how it developed on Earth, my thought, or I have two thoughts. One of them is it's kind of a short amount of time that life just sprung into, into being what it is. Um,
Yeah.
even shorter if you think about how fast we developed. I mean, you said a couple million years, whatever. It's insane how fast we developed as a species. So when I think about the idea of life and how much there is on this planet, I wonder what your thoughts are on panspermia. The idea of panspermia.
Well, it's definitely possible, but it really, in my mind, it's just passing the buck. It's saying, well, it came from somewhere else, sure, but where did that come from, and where did that come from? And so, yeah, I mean, if you have a lot of the building blocks of life on comets, and I think there were some studies that came out recently that indicated that there's amino acids even on comets. Can you back that up? I don't want to be
Hold on.
peddling false
While we're-
No,
narrative.
that is
Yeah,
correct. I have heard the
yeah.
same thing as well. There have been the base chain amino acids, A, C,
Yeah,
G,
and
T.
proteins are just amino acids in
Yes.
various combinations. So, and it's one of the most important aspects of life, obviously, the coding system that dictates the order and number of those amino acids to make the proteins. But yeah, if you have that sort of thing, and we know all the water on this planet came from comets. So yeah, you could, if there was life on them. I find that harder to believe, just because it's such a cold, atmosphere-less environment. You don't have the liquid water yet, because it has to get heated up on Earth. And there's a lot of indications based on life that forms around heat vents and oceans and things like that, that you might need it to land on a planet before the life can really take off. But if you have the building blocks for life on these comets, then yeah, certainly, as they're colliding with planets and melting the water and dropping all that stuff off, it's absolutely possible that you could get life.
Yeah, there was a couple, by the way. I see, just real quick, I can't pronounce this, but Ryugu asteroid analysis in 2022.
Yeah.
Samples from the Ryugu asteroid were analyzed, revealing the presence of intact amino acids and vitamin B3.
Cool.
And then there's a couple other ones. 2006. There was some. I guess it says there was a comet Wild 2 returned to Earth, which hinted that there was some life on there too. So there's a couple things.
Yeah,
You
I mean,
mentioned
that definitely
RNA.
lends-
I got a
Yeah,
little
go ahead.
video clip, because I think this relates perfectly, and you brought it up, so I didn't even have to ask. But we're all familiar with DNA. RNA, it kind of gets misunderstood as either just a messenger or something used to encode, like CRISPR gene editing instructions. But
Yeah.
this is some recent findings on the importance of RNA and the origin of life. So take a look.
Okay, so this news is kind of a huge deal. In my opinion, the biggest mystery left unsolved in science is the origin of life, how life got started here on Earth. we have no idea, but a paper published just this week hints at part of a possible explanation. The authors of the paper suggest that since all life on Earth has nucleic acids like RNA, then maybe life started as simple RNA molecules that gained the ability to do things like make more of themselves, self-replicate, and evolve. Now, we already knew that RNA was really cool. It can both store information and act as genetic material, but it can also catalyze reactions and take part in metabolism. But the authors of this new study wanted to know this. How do you get from a single garden variety RNA molecule to life, right? Life isn't just RNA, there's more to it than that. How do you get complexity out of that RNA molecule? They carried out experiments. So they started with a tube with a single type of RNA molecule that could make more of itself, and they exposed it to experimental evolution. So they basically just watched it evolve in the lab for 240 generations. And they found something pretty remarkable. So what started out as a tube full of a single type of RNA molecule ended up as a network of 5 different kinds of RNA molecules that helped each other out. They also found evidence of parasitic RNAs that didn't help out the cycle but maybe fed off of one of the members. Of course, there's still a ton of work to do and lots of unanswered questions, like where that first RNA would come from to begin with. But it's still really cool and just gives us another option to consider when we're trying to figure out how life originated on this planet.
So there you go. Like we talked about the base amino acids. Okay, but could that have even gone crazy? Do they have the ability to change themselves? And evolution started basically right off the bat. I find that very
that's really cool. And the other thing too, in that primordial soup, there's bound to be a lot of variation in the environments, hot, cold, dry, wet. So yeah, you'd expect to have the forces of evolution working even harder, because what drives evolution is a change in environment. It's a big reason why we really adapted to bipedalism, because it started to dry out on the east part of Africa, where a lot of hominin evolution took place. And it wasn't the driving force, but over time, the environment was more conducive to walking upright for a number of reasons I won't bore you with. But yeah, I've been saying this in my class for decades, that simple always comes before complex. And DNA is just 2 RNAs we've woven together as a double helix. So if one strand of that is the simple version, 2 strands is more complex, then you would assume that the RNA comes first. What's interesting, though, is that the viruses aren't considered life, because most of them, I think maybe even all of them, are RNA based and they can't replicate themselves. So it's like they need a host to replicate themselves. So they're not considered life for that reason. If they could replicate themselves, then we would classify them as any other sort of single cellular organism. But so I don't know, if we're talking about things like viruses as the first life form, then I think it's hard to imagine how that would replicate itself. Or maybe it's just an aspect of modern day viruses, but they seemingly have a lot of those ancestral traits, and having RNA as their main way in which they code themselves is an indication of that too.
This would have been, I should have asked this question earlier. Maybe this is a perfect time, but I watched a lot of debates about evolution versus creationism growing up. A lot of fun. It's a lot of great points, a lot of fun stuff to watch. If you guys ever have a chance to,
I've been to some live. I used to go to them live. They would have them at Ohio University when I was an undergrad, and yeah, it was super fun. You'd get a huge room full of like 1,000 students, and they're just going at it. And they're really fun.
I think it's epic. I mean, maybe it's because we're nerds. I don't know. Maybe obviously,
yeah, it's probably part of it. And I mean, it's existential questions,
Yeah,
and they're not mutually exclusive. What I hate is that it's always presented as black and white, but it's not. And in fact, I used to tell my class, because I would teach evolution. I'm not trying to cut you off here, but I think it's an important point that teaching in the Bible Belt, especially at Ohio State, I would get students who had very guttural knee-jerk reactions to anything involving evolution. I would tell them, and I grew up in an evangelical Christian home, and I would tell them everything that's laid out in Genesis is more or less exactly how we understand it. This process of there's light, there's earth, and there's animals, and so you can look at it. I think in the book of Peter, even, I could be wrong about the exact location, but it says something like how a day to God is like 10,000 days to us, or 10,000 years or something like that. So if you think about it in the context of time as well, that could be very much the same thing, just a different description of the same thing, how we understand it in modern day biological terms versus the early scriptures.
Yeah,
Yeah, I had a similar issue. My mom, when I learned about evolution in school, I went to Catholic high school, and she's like, "I'm sending you to a Catholic school. Why are they teaching you about evolution? And we came from monkeys and all this." And to me, it was like, okay, well, just because we may have looked different millions of years ago, that still doesn't negate creation or life or whatever that spark was that caused it. So what if we came from something else? And it was such a simple thing for me. But I could literally see the expression in my mother's face change, where she had never thought of it like that. No one had ever spoken to her like that. And, I think that divide still exists in science.
Oh,
We're kind of
absolutely.
a split vote. We have UAP fans that are, for the most part, spiritual or believe in something. And then we have hardcore science people that are like, if it's not in the data, it doesn't exist. And I think it's all kind of goes back to that. You either believed in evolution or you believed in God. But I think every time science figures something out, it proves the amazement of creation even more. I see that they do get along. What do you think?
Well, I cut off Marquise. He was talking about the debates. I wanted to let him finish that first.
Sure.
Sorry. So the debate is, I mean, you mentioned during your response there that there's young Earth creationist and there's the evolutionary creationist, people who believe that this God essentially used evolution to make us the way that we are today. They don't have to be mutually exclusive, like you said.
No.
I would like for you to expand on that, because what is your perspective on that? Do you think that it's possible that maybe something or someone or an intelligence of some kind maybe created us? Or do you think that we were created just by the natural process of the universe, of physics?
Yeah, I mean, that's the age-old question of man, really. We've been trying to figure that out probably since the dawn of time. It's funny, a lot of people like me, I hear this over and over anymore. You grow up very in a religious home, it's beaten down your throat, and mine in particular is sort of the misogynistic, racist side. Like, we got a female pastor, and my dad's like, hell no, we are getting out of here. Went to an ultra conservative church because of it. He would read us Bible verses on Sundays about how we have to respect our elders and a woman's place is in the kitchen and all this stuff. And so you rebel against it, obviously, if you have empathy for others. And but a lot of us are kind of circling back to this, at least spirituality or source consciousness, as an aspect of that benevolent, all-knowing, all-seeing God. So yeah, I think if you reframe it in a way that makes sense. It's almost like you have to leave home and go experience things in other cultures to really understand humanity. I think you need to leave that strict conformist ideology that a lot of people grow up with, especially where I grew up in the Bible Belt, and go see other worldviews, and then make sense. Like Eckhart Tolle does a good job of this, bringing together Jesus's teachings and that of Buddha and all of these other spiritual leaders and sages from across the world, and they're all saying basically the same thing. So yeah, you combine that with the fact, or at least studies that indicate that the soul survives bodily death, people's near-death experiences, LSD, psilocybin, DMT, where you get a little fleeting glimpse of this reality and this other side that you can't really bring things back from, but it at least raises your awareness and you see more about what is this physical reality, what lies beyond that, and you start to get inklings of heaven and God and just the source consciousness, the original mind. That if that would have been presented to me as a kid, I would have been like, sweet, this is a cool religion, count me in. But it wasn't. It was it was the opposite.
Fire and brimstone, man. That's what.
Yeah, fire and brimstone. So it's like, I don't know. For me, I've had a journey, and I've heard so many people recently. Bernardo Kastrup said the same thing on an interview as well. So yeah, and I think it does play into the UFO thing too, with the materialism, the reductionist materialism.
Oh, that's your new kitty.
I know. We just got
welcome to the show
a couple days ago. He sits on my lap when I work, and he's usually quiet, and sometimes he'll crawl up and start smacking me in the face. But yes, it's
that is cute.
Well, he's welcome to stay.
Well, I don't think we could control that. He does what he wants, but it's always cute and snuggly. Great cat. Anyway. Yeah, I don't know, and I don't think anybody can know. I think when you die, because you go home, you go revisit that consciousness, and yeah, I think it is what we call God. So I've sort of come to believe in God again, I guess. Whether or not that has anything to do with the creation myths and our origins or anything teleological about where we might be going or a direction that humanity is being steered. I don't know, but I have come to sense that presence and understand it in a way that I never could have as a child.
Well said. And good job answering both of our questions with one statement. I told you guys at home this guy's good, eh?
Oh, get out of town. It's the kitty power. He's
I used to have a corgi, and when it was a puppy, it literally looked like a mini teddy bear. Like, it's the cutest, no tail, big ears. And I ran a car dealership, and I'd bring the dog in, and that dog closed more car deals than my top salesman. So
I believe it.
Wow.
Yeah. It's called Kinden Shima. It's this reaction, not just humans, but all animals have. You've probably seen like leopards raising antelope as babies. It's because you see something cute and they're made to be cute, so we don't kill them because they're very annoying sometimes too. But yeah, the big eyes, paedomorphic characteristics is what we say. They have the big eyes, oversized hands and feet for their body. And yeah, it is cute. It's innately cute, and we can't resist that. Same with human babies.
Yeah. And that's important as well in the evolution of psychology, the idea that it's sort of the survival of the fittest. Well, but is it though? Because I mean, we don't, if something were to attack our baby, we don't say, well, screw it, it can't fend for itself.
Right.
Survival of the fittest.
You know what's cool about these little bastards too is that they mimic a human baby's cry with their meow.
Wow. Yeah.
You hear that? Like
That's so cute.
Cats in the wild don't do that. As we domesticated them, they started doing that so we would take care of them because it triggers our innate response. Like, oh, this baby needs help. It needs food or to be cared for. Snuggles all the time with this one, apparently. But that's something that they developed in response to us, and we developed that. I'll take care of you because they make this little meowing sound. So yeah, and a lot of things with dogs too, how they changed in association with our societies. It's really cool if you look across the animal kingdom, domesticated and wild type animals.
Yeah, they've done tests with like a wolf and a dog, and they try to get like a point response. So they'll have two bowls of food, one has a treat, one doesn't. You take a domesticated dog and you point at the right one, and it will go to the right one. No matter how many times you do that with a wolf, it just goes by its nose and its instincts. It doesn't look for us. And to your point about the meowing, I have two Bengals, which I consider fairly wild as far as domesticated cats go. They don't vocalize with each other. When you hear them meowing, it's because they're fighting and wrestling, but they only meow at us as humans. They don't have that same tone with each other.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, and it's almost like they domesticated us just as much. Like we clean up their poop, we feed them, we water them. Yeah, it's an interesting relationship. In fact, dogs were the first domesticated animal. I think it was maybe as early as 45,000 years ago. So we've had a long time to not just co-evolve with them, but to make all kinds of weird varieties of them too.
Yeah.
That actually reminds me of, and this is aside from my question, but this reminds me of that experiment. I can't think of what it's called, but they did an experiment where they taught monkeys had learned a skill, or was it apes or whatever, on one part of a location, but then somehow that same skill was learned by another group of monkeys or apes or whatever in a different location, and they had never communicated before. I don't even know what to make of that. Like, I mean, connected consciousness or a group, whatever you want to call it. That's an interesting phenomenon. I don't quite understand.
Yeah. I mean, cultural transmission is very normal. Like we taught Washoe the chimpanzee like 160 sign language signs back in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And outside of the presence of the primatologists, Washoe taught an infant chimp all of these signs, just saw it as important enough to be like, hey, come here, I want to show you how to do this so you can communicate with these humans who clearly control our lives. But that's direct cultural communication, obviously. There's a group of chimpanzees in Gombe Wildlife Preserve where they'll put a specific type of leaf in their mouth and then rip it in front of another individual to speak to them, to communicate that I would like to be groomed now, please. And so they'll do that, and the other individual will groom them, which is their primary form of bonding. An affiliative behavior is what we call it. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on with other animals that we're not really aware of. Elephants are constantly talking to each other, but it's in the infrasonic.
Yeah. Oh no. I think we lost. I think we might have lost. I didn't. I was going to ask a two-part question, but I'll have to. I'll wait.
We'll have to wait for
Um,
it to log back in here. So let's see if we can get.
Up in there. I
All
started.
right, we are back. We are all back.
yeah, we're ready to
You were
rock and roll.
saying, Mike, about the infrasound that elephants communicate at.
Yeah, so I made this argument in my first book about the unlikelihood that we would be able to communicate with animals that evolved on a separate planet. They would probably have some sort of ability to pick up and process vibrational communication, which is obviously what we use. We vibrate our pharynx. But the ease with which these UFO occupants speak to us and in our native languages across the board seems to indicate that they have access to records on our languages. But yeah, I give some examples, like with the infrasound of elephants, with the ultra high pitch of a lot of other animals. Moths use pheromones to communicate. The demon African mole rat just pounds its head on the tunnel because they're burrowers to communicate. So there's all these different forms. So on top of the fact that it'd be very unlikely that they would be upright walking hominin forms like us with the same pentadactyly and tetrapod configuration that goes back 400 million years on this planet, it's unlikely that they could communicate because they would probably have a very different form of communication.
Good point. When I was doing the research for this episode, I wanted to look into sort of the principles of evolutionary biology. And what I found was there were four main ones anyway. So you got mutation, genetic drift, natural selection, and gene
flow. That's right.
Yeah. But I also see, it's like I've taken one of your courses.
Yeah, I just gave that lecture a few weeks ago. It's a really important way to set up the rest of the course. It's just an intro to anthropology class. So we start with biological anthropology, primatology, human variation, like the concept of race and how there really is no biological validity to the term race, because it used to be thought that there were three racial groups, and then they did a polymorphic genetic study in the 1970s, Richard Lewontin, and found that only about 6.8% of the variation among all humans can be accounted for by differences between these three groups. And there's other reasons too, but that's kind of the main ones, based on polygenic traits, which is really hard to make discrete categories out of. So we go through that and then human evolution, but all of that is predicated on a basic understanding of evolution. Yeah, gene flow, gene drift, mutation, and natural selection. So we really focus on that and the genetic side of it, because then you can use that as a building block to get into all of these other aspects of humanity and other life forms too. But obviously in an anthropology class, we're just focused on humans.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing to talk about. I'm curious about this idea of differences. Why do you, first of all, why is everything so different? I don't get what the purpose is of differences, when it seems like to me, if something were to be evolutionarily the most efficient thing, then variations seem to be counterproductive to that, I guess, survival. I mean, at one point, I know I'm wrong, obviously, because clearly you're shaking your head no. But from my perspective, I think of it like, why did Neanderthals become extinct for us to make way for us to be here when we are literally the weaker of the two species? Like, why did we survive? Yeah, we have a greater intelligence, so to speak. But in terms of this environment, they seem to have been much more adept at survival than we are.
They were physically adapted to their environment, but the one thing that gives humans the ability to conquer all environments is not just our intelligence, but our culture. So yeah, modern humans came into the region of the Neanderthals, at least in Western Europe, around 40 to 45,000 years ago. And though we weren't as adapted to the environment physiologically, they had shorter bodies, part of the Bergman and Allen's rule, where you have shorter, squatter bodies in cold environments, longer, skinny bodies in warmer environments, because you want to radiate more heat away from the body where it's hot. So we talk about it in the context of a mass to surface area ratio. It's better to have a higher mass to surface area ratio in a cold environment, because that allows you to trap the warmth within your body and keep it there. You also have a fat layer and less sweating, more hair, the increased metabolic rate. And Neanderthals had all of those things. But when we came in, we not only had a more sophisticated toolkit, but better weapons and larger population sizes and better, it's thought, a better form of communication where we could actively hunt and go to war in a very organized fashion, where we're talking about a plan. We go into a Neanderthal encampment and wipe them all out. And that's the fact that they disappeared in this region within 2,000 years of modern humans getting there indicates that it was a warfare scenario. But clearly we were interbreeding with them too. So the other main theory is that we just overwhelmed them with our genes. And it's probably a little bit of that too, but mostly the murder, death, kill part, just based on how fast they went extinct within these various regions. But yeah, the variation is actually important because like Louis was talking about, you have gene flow, gene drift, and mutation. Mutation is the only place you get new gene variants, but gene flow and gene drift mix up those variants. So you have genes from this population coming in here. They're not new, they already existed here, but they come into a new population, change the overall gene structure of that interbreeding group. And then natural selection directs that change. So the more variation you have, the better, because especially if you have changed in environments or you migrate into new environments, which is what happened with our ancestors about 2 million years ago. Homo erectus, all of human evolution for the previous 4 million years took place on the continent of Africa. Then about 2 million years ago, we spread out into all of these other regions. As we did that, those variants got picked apart, selected for or against, and the ones that were beneficial obviously went into new generations and spread across geographic space. So, it's another thing I point out is that it was one of many flaws. I guess I should preface this. One of many flaws with the Nazi eugenics movement, and the eugenics movement in general. It actually started in the United States in the late 1800s, and then Hitler started reading some books and was like, "Oh yeah, okay, let's do this on a mass scale." But it was actually an ideology that originated here in the early 1900s, late 1800s. And the problem is, though, there's an inherent conflict in this, because what you're doing is limiting the genetic variation. You're limiting the bell curve to this one segment. I think the Aryan blonde hair, blue eyes thing or whatever there specifically. But then if the environment changes or you change environments, some of those variants that might have helped you survive are gone.
Yeah.
You limit your gene pool, and that limits your ability to adapt to new selective pressures. So that variation is actually the basis of evolution, that you want a broad range of variation because certain parts might win out. And especially when you talk about viruses, bacteria, pathogens in general, that's why our HLA and MCA, major histocompatibility complex, MHC. Sorry, I had to spell it out to get the acronym right. That's why they're the most variable parts of our physiology, because viruses and bacteria are killing us. So we spread out that variation. So there's something that can fight back across the board. It's also why they use it for paternity tests, because it's completely unlikely that you would have the same immune system genotype as someone else. So that's why we employ it in that capacity as well.
So it's just real quick. It sounds like diversity or biological or genetic diversity is more advantageous for the human, existence, if
For
you will,
everything,
in evolution,
yeah.
than to be more isolated in genetically.
Yep, absolutely.
So if you look at evolution and sort of the rate and speed of it, as you said, 200 million years ago, compare that to like the last 100 years with the Industrial Revolution, technology, all the things we have available. Is there a difference? Like, is society and culture actually taking a part in our evolution? And is that showing up in our genes?
Yeah, these are great questions. And really, that's at the heart of anthropology. That's what we do. And what separates it from human biology is that we focus on the long-term evolutionary changes, but in the context of what we call biocultural evolution. In humans, beginning about 3 million years ago, you can no longer separate those. There's not a cultural evolution and a biological evolution. Our biology influences our culture, and that one, makes sense, but our culture also influences our biology. A good example is once we developed stone tools about 3 million years ago, and then especially fire about 1.8 million years ago, again with Homo erectus, largely in East Africa, that influenced our physiology tremendously because we could start to process our food and cook our food. So it relaxed selective pressure for larger teeth and a larger musculature, or chewing apparatus, masticatory muscles, as we say. And that allowed our faces to shrink back even more to get out of the way of our expanding brain. throughout human evolution, that's the main trade-off. You have a forward movement of the frontal lobes, also a mediolateral expansion of the parietal lobes, and that can only happen if the face gets out of the way. So I often talk about, I think in my first book, I use the example of dogs too. Like you can picture a collie or a German Shepherd or a Doberman Pinscher with a really long projecting face, low sloping forehead, versus like a lab, it's kind of in between, and then a pug or a bulldog or a chihuahua with a super small retracted face and a big bulbous head. So the same thing happened throughout human evolution. And it's largely, or not largely, but partly the result. It's very much the result of standing upright and cranial flexing. I won't bore you with the details of that. But then it's also this brain behavior feedback loop that allowed the runaway brain to run super far down the tracks, because we would use our brain to solve problems culturally, and then those cultural solutions would impact our evolution. So it's this give and take, and so we can't separate them. That's why we call it biocultural evolution and human evolution and hominin evolution, simply because the two are so intertwined that we have to consider them together. And it's really a big part of why we're so unique and why we can sit here with all of this technology and talk about it while other animals can't.
There is a documentary called Zeitgeist Moving Forward, because what you just said has me thinking about this. I think about
What's
this a
it
lot.
called? Zeitgeist Moving Forward.
Zeitgeist Moving Forward. It was made by Peter Joseph of the Zeitgeist movement, like Jacques Fresco, Venus Project. They did a whole resource-based economy. It's a really interesting idea. I really kind of took to that. But there was a couple of people in there. I'm trying to think of it, pronounce his name, Gobar Mate, and thank you, Gabor.
Gabor
Wow.
Mate.
Let's cut that out of the video, please.
Oh wait, man, that was awesome. You always got to go for it. You got to try.
Oh yeah, I should have just told. And then Robert Sapolsky, which I could at least say his name. They talked about this kind of what you were mentioning, the sociological effects on our biology, and that how the people would say things like people are genetically predisposed to be violent, which is not true, or that our society is just supposed to be this way in terms of the chaos and the disarray, the violence. It's just how we are as humans. But essentially what they were making an argument for was that we have built a society off of that. And because of that, it has affected our biology. It's made us, in some cases, in these anomalies where people are psychopaths, which could happen, I guess, regardless of whether or not there's a culture there or not. But more so, there's this nature of violence in our society because of the way that we've created society. Not it's a byproduct of it, not because that's just how we are genetically.
Yeah. Well, and it's that age-old nature versus nurture debate. And it's probably both. I tell my classes all the time, if something is framed as black or white, it's always the gray area, or at least some scale between the extremes. And yeah, certainly certain people have a predisposition for violence, aggressiveness. And we had this conversation in the 90s when I was a kid with rap music and video games, and I was into both. And it's like, does it bring something out? If you're born a very peaceful, nice, loving person, which I think all children are, except for some that have, psychopathic tendencies, of course. But you're growing up in an abusive household, you're gonna develop those tendencies as well, and vice versa. I think it works in both directions. What's interesting about humans too, chimpanzees, the common chimpanzees, not pygmy chimpanzees, bonobos. And I talk about this a lot in my last book, Revelation, The Future Human Past, where we have a segment of our population that's more like the bonobos, where they're a matriarchy. They just have sex all the time for fun. It's not even about reproduction. They're just always rubbing their genitals together and doing all kinds of freaky stuff with very few rules. The one rule is that a mother and a son over 6 years old is off limits. Otherwise, game on with everything. Like you could get on Pornhub and not see some of the shit that they're doing.
Yeah, they do it like 13 times a day or something stupid, right?
Yeah. Well, but again, it's not sex. It's just constant sex play. They just enjoy each other and that feeling. And who doesn't, of course. But then the common chimpanzee is the only other hominoid, the only other animal across the entire animal kingdom that's been observed going to war with each other than us, of course. So it's almost like that split in the human population too, where it's like peace and love, and then there's the murder, death, kill. Let's always go to war, prop up the military-industrial complex mentality. So I don't know, like how nature nurture plays into that. It's almost like we've bifurcated in the same way that the bonobos and the common chimpanzees have.
You mentioned food and how our diet has changed. And I wonder, again, doing this research, there's a lot of talk about how some people have lactose or certain starch inabilities to digest. Our gut
Yep.
would have changed from not eating raw, undigested meat. So, what's sort of been our physiological dietary changes, do you think, as a result of evolution?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. And the main there's a couple, like I talked about the stone tools and the fire, how that relaxed selective pressure for masticatory musculature. But even before that, Leslie Aiello in South Africa published a really important paper called the expensive tissue hypothesis, where our expensive tissue is our brains, obviously, and we've really benefited from having larger, more complex brains, but they're an energy suck. So what they argue in this paper is that around the time of the Australopithecines, the gracile Australopithecines, around 3.5, maybe 4 million years ago, we shifted our diet to being more omnivorous and consuming more meat. And we can see that in the evolution of our midsection, our gastrointestinal system. Obviously, the soft tissue doesn't preserve, but we can see changes in the morphology of the hard tissue in that region. And it indicates that we started eating meat more to fuel this brain. Meanwhile, there was an offshoot, the robust Australopithecines, who were purely vegetarians. They have a craniofacial architecture just like gorillas, with a big sagittal crest and a huge ascending ramus of their mandible, a big temporal fossa where those muscles pass through to be able to constantly chew. And they all died off. We might have even eaten them, because our ancestors, the gracile Australopithecines, eventually became Homo habilis and Homo erectus when we started hunting, and they suddenly disappeared. So we may have actually eaten them, but that's one early indication of, again, a behavioral, cultural change that influenced our physiology. And then lactose intolerance is another one of those. Lactose tolerance is the weird thing. The wild type is intolerance. We should all be intolerant. Even, this cute little bugger loves milk now, but
he's drinking milk of his own kind. We're drinking milk from another animal, and there's no
true,
other
but it
animal.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where it comes from.
Right,
But what's different about us is that we can drink it in adulthood. At some point, this fuzzy little fucker's ability to drink it's gonna fall off. What happens is we produce lactase. It's the enzyme that breaks down lactose, and it's very odd for us to still do that. East Asian populations who mostly domesticated chickens and pigs, many of them are lactose intolerant. Again, the normal thing, because they didn't have that selective pressure where they're getting a lot of nutrients from milk, dairy products, and the East African cattle complex, the Maasai and the Arel. A lot of these groups subsist almost entirely off of the blood and milk of cows. They're parasitizing the cow. They don't just kill it and eat the meat, but rather live off of the nutrients that come from the milk, and then the warriors drink the blood, just straight up, shots of blood. But the rest of the population mixes the blood with the milk, and they put a hollow arrow into the neck and then take the blood out, but not enough to kill it. And then that's a very strong selective pressure to be able to continue producing lactase into adulthood, so that you can still break down the lactose and not have all of the effects that come with drinking milk or eating dairy products when that gene shuts off.
That's disgusting.
I don't know. I never had the chance to drink it, but yeah, a lot of people have that I know who have worked in that area, and they're like, it's warm and weird, but it's not horrible.
Warm and weird. All right.
It's probably delicious to them. It's probably delicious.
It's obviously, yeah, clearly. I mean, I like medium rare steak, so I guess it's kind of.
It's not that different. It's not that different than a medium rare steak.
I mean, it'd be like if I drain this steak out and then just, which I do that too, I guess. Yeah,
do that. Just wring it out in your mouth next time.
That's some flavorful stuff, man. I mean,
you don't want blood in steak is not actually blood.
That's true.
I think it's called heme.
Yeah, it's like the way the proteins break down or something, isn't it?
Yeah. They can't.
Yeah.
They actually. I guess you cannot. You cannot leave blood inside of those meats. I
Yeah,
think
it-
isn't it like illegal? Isn't it like illegal for them to do that?
You know what
Because
I
if
learned recently? I used to uh I used to hunt a lot, elk and deer, whitetail, muleys, and I would cook these steaks, and I was always afraid that my family would get sick, from something in the meat, even though it's a better source of meat than most that you buy at the grocery store. So I cooked it too much. It's like not burnt, but it's definitely
well
tough.
done.
And then, yeah, it's well done, but not well done in the context of how it should be eaten. And then, like, my life changed about a year ago when I heard like a story on the news or something, or read something. I don't remember what it was, that the bacteria can't actually penetrate the meat in a steak. Like with burgers, you have to cook them all the way through because it can get mixed up in there. And then if it's raw, but with steak, it can't penetrate it. And I was like, oh, Jesus Christ, I've been doing this whole time. I didn't have to. So I started cooking everything like rare, how my family wanted to eat it the entire time. And now it's like, we don't eat meat all the time, but it's good when we do, because
well,
I stopped fucking it up.
I mean, this is definitely not part of my just the conversation we're having now is relevant. I watched this video on TikTok of a disease that was very contagious to humans as well, but deer get it, and if they get it, it like I don't know if it like eats their brain away or something like that,
It's Lyme
and
disease,
it
Yeah.
makes
isn't
them.
it?
Well, there's chronic
don't
wasting
think-
disease, which is a big problem here. It didn't used to be where I live, specifically in Southwest Montana, but it was creeping and creeping, and now, yeah, it's definitely, you're not just in deer, but in elk as well.
Right.
But then there's also, I think what you're talking about is the prion diseases, a lot
I
like
think
mad
so.
mad cow disease,
Yeah,
which is
'cause they would
Yeah.
which is
jump around
different
like
because it's not bacteria or a virus; it's a prion. It's this thing that is related to the neurological tissues. You can get it from the brain, or if you're cutting the back straps off of an elk and you get into that spinal column and it's in there, it can infect the meat that way too. And yeah, basically leads to something similar to dementia.
Amazing. So with that, we're at the just a little over our halfway point. So we'll take our 5-minute break. Everybody refill your drinks, and we'll see you back here in 5 with more of Dr. Michael Paul Masters. And we are back. We are back with the second half of Quantum Letter Podcast with our good friend, Michael Paul Masters. And we've mainly been chatting about the physical effects of evolution, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about psychological effects and mainly a couple things, specifically anxiety and sort of this fight or flight response that we kind of get stuck in, which is an evolutionary trait, but it contributes to a lot of issues that we're having in a new and modern world. So I've got two video clips. I'll play the first one here on sort of evolutionary psychology, anxiety, and then we'll get your guys' thoughts and feedback. So check this out.
Explaining how evolutionary psychology can cure your anxiety as if you were a 9-year-old. Let's go. Our suffering comes from thinking, whether that's regretting the past or worrying about the future, which then creates bad feelings, negative emotions that we don't like. But here's the problem. The reason us humans have survived for so many years is because our brain's only job is to help us survive and reproduce. It doesn't care whether we are happy or not. Richard Dawkins called this process the selfish genes. The genes that are the most successful at surviving and reproducing are the ones that succeed, which is the ones that we are made of. So these genes tell us to be nervous when someone doesn't like us, because in the past we would only survive if we had a tribe around us. But of course that's not true anymore. They tell you to be nervous when you're publicly speaking, because in the past the only time we would publicly speak is when we were on trial for our life, which of course isn't true anymore. So how does this make us less anxious? Because it reminds us that our thoughts and emotions are working against us. That we aren't supposed to feel happy and calm all the time because it's not in our nature. Then we can use this knowledge to remind ourselves of this. That we're safe, we're in a warm house or a safe classroom, that we have food in the cupboards, or that if somebody doesn't like us then they're not going to kill us. Suddenly we can stop taking our thoughts so seriously. We can just observe them as an outsider and not let them overwhelm us. And if you remind yourself of this, life will feel a whole lot easier.
So what do you guys think of that?
I take massive issue with that. I gotta say, because I want to see if you can kind of clarify my ridiculous thoughts here. Ridiculously simple thoughts. When I hear that, I think that it seems like it neglects the fact that it's, to me, and from what I've read about psychology, the brain is geared towards maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain and suffering. So, for example, and this is what I remember reading about. This is a while ago when I read about the psychology of how we feel. We want to feel good about ourselves, the self-esteem. Our self-esteem needs to be good, or else we have what people express as mental illness. When we do not have a good, strong self-esteem for whatever purpose, then we tend to have a lower quality of life. And in our today, a high self-esteem comes from success, or what is perceived to be a success. But that success is not the thing that makes people feel like suffering or the lack of success. It's the feeling of survival, as he said before. If you don't have people looking at you and liking you and feeling good about you, then that could affect your ability to survive. Because if you go to get a job, the employer needs to like you. And the whole point of a job is so you can make money. And the whole point of money is so you can survive. Or if you have a family, to provide for your family. And so I feel like the idea that it's just survival, it's not the only problem. I think we also are experiencing a lot of stress, and that's because of societal and cultural issues versus just the survival ones. Maybe you can make sense of what I just said. Maybe.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's an oversimplification. There's some truth to it. And again, it comes back to the nature-nurture thing. Like, yes, our nature is to have a fight or flight response, but we've kind of buffered ourselves from a lot of that over the course of the last 1.5, 2 million years. Once we got to the point where we had weapons and fire and could defend ourselves and reduce the anxiety associated with the saber-toothed cat coming into our cave and biting our leg off, then it definitely began this change where we're not fearing tigers and elephant stampedes, but we're now more fearful of each other. But at the same time, through the domestication process, because we've been domesticating ourselves over the last 30,000 years, we've had selection for more pro-social behaviors that help us to exist in larger groups. But I feel it all the time. I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression about 8 years ago, experienced it my whole life, but it got to the point where I had to seek help and prescribed all these drugs. They're absolutely horrible, and I stopped taking them, and more recently found a drug regimen that does help. that a lot of people are using now that's still illegal and taboo, so I won't go into detail. But it's something where we have changed our environment more rapidly now. Like Marquis said, it's different. Even recently, it used to be family, it used to be groups that we lived with, that we knew everyone in the community. Now you move across the country, you're all by yourself. You'll make some friends, but you're in a big city and there's sounds and lights. And like I live in a pretty small town, relatively speaking, 40,000 people, but I lived in the city. Moved out of the city about 3 years ago into the forest with a bunch of wild animals, and that did so much for my mental health by going back to this sort of ancestral environment. So I do think it's both. I do take issue with his statement that the only time public speaking happened is if you were on trial for your life. That's absolutely not true at
Yeah.
all. You look at any traditional society, and there's shaman, there's leaders, there's elders. They speak in front of people all the time, but those people you're speaking to are largely your family,
Right.
extended family, or blood relatives. So it's different talking to family than it is a group of strangers who are there to judge you and tear you down for who you are and what you're saying. So again, it's both. It's definitely, there's some truth to it, but it's more complex than that reductionist view.
I apologize, Louis, here. I want to clarify maybe something else that I was thinking also. In that documentary, The Zeitgeist Moving Forward, there's the entire beginning. I mean, like the 40 minutes in the beginning of that documentary, amazing documentary. They talk about the idea of nature versus nurture. And the one example they give, or many of many, is the idea that when a baby is first born, they need to be nurtured. They need to feel warmth and comfort and so forth. And as they develop, they need to feel loved and safe and secure. Because without that, there can be these aberrations of behavior. We think of these behaviors as we mentioned, but these are just how some people are. Or maybe somebody's weak or whatever. But ultimately, it's because this is a response. It's a stimulus response where somebody is not getting what at least they need in the beginning, which is that nurturing love. The Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they're not getting that. And so survival, again, it is important. But I personally believe, and I believe this not only strongly, but I think I oppose the idea that that nurture isn't what I think is even more important than nature. I think it's far more important.
Yeah, to back that up, there's a study done, kind of a classic study in the 80s or 90s, I don't remember when it was, where they had these macaques, these baby macaques, and they would have one with no mother, one with like a wire mother, and then one that was a wire mother covered in fur. And the ones that even just had the ability to cuddle with the one covered in fur were way better adjusted. And then you think about like what nurturing is now, and in our society, it's constant love, encouragement, reinforcement. It's not just about, I give them hugs every now and then. Like you have to constantly give psychological and emotional support, which isn't necessarily the case with other animals, and maybe wasn't throughout history, because you could get it everywhere else because you're related to everybody. We're allopatric. We move around. There's just no support. And yeah, it's a very different situation with humans. So I certainly don't take away from that sociocultural aspect, but it's definitely complex. I do enjoy that video though. I'm enjoying all of these like little clips, and then we comment on them. It's kind of fun.
This is, I find something that is thought-provoking, something that'll get a reaction, good, bad, or indifferent. But I wanted to go back to what you were saying about anxiety and depression. I, too, deal with that myself. I did not want to go on a medicine regime because I know the side effects. And to be quite honest, if you're depressed and they give you a pill and this pill says, hey, the side effect of this is you might kill yourself, I don't think that's an effective treatment. So I did what was called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy.
I've heard of that,
understand the root cause of why you suffer, the relationship between thoughts, emotions, and feelings. And one of the things that was brought up in one of my sessions was the fight or flight. I do have a clip on that here, but in a nutshell, millions of years ago, the fight or flight, you're either going to get eaten or run away. It's relatively short-lived. Now we're worried about our mortgage, our jobs, our family, disease, what's going to happen with the economy. You can't turn that off. So now your brain is kind of in this loop of fight or flight, but unlike millions of years ago where it ended relatively fast, one way or the other, it's now this rumination of things that you can't turn it off, and that leads to prolonged anxiety. So I'll run this clip here, and then I'll get your guys' thoughts on sort of the evolution of why we are anxious, and is there a connection to our past self.
This is what you can do if you are stuck in fight or flight and you're specifically noticing that any decision that you try to make feels like it needs to be the perfect decision, or it's not safe to make that decision, which is a lot of people. What I'm going to do is quickly explain what is likely happening in your body to make you feel this way, and then I'm going to break down situation-specific things that you can do to help to support yourself, as well as overall tips and things that you can consider to more deeply regulate your nervous system. This analysis paralysis and this feeling of needing to make the perfect decision every single time you make a decision, but almost being absolutely terrified of making that decision, is characteristic of being in a very activated state as it relates to the nervous system spectrum. So I'm going to explain what this means a little bit more. The way that we evolved was to move through this nervous system spectrum pretty flawlessly and being able to move into an activated state when we perceive a threat around us, either fight or run away from that threat, and then move back into a regulated state. In today's modern society, we have an unprecedented level of threat, including the stimulation that you get from living in cities and being on your phone, getting notifications, the air that you breathe, so on and so forth. So there's literally millions of years of evolutionary intelligence driving you to fight the threat or to run away from the threat. And your body is designed to choose if that fight or if that flight response is going to lead to your survival, which is making a choice. Now, there's two things that contribute to your inability to feel safe making decisions. Number one, most people are chronically stuck in some level of dysregulation, whether it's this really activated state or shifting between the activation and the freeze and shutdown states, simply due to this level of stimulation that we have today that our bodies really are not equipped to handle from a physiological perspective. Two is we evolved to handle threats like this that were physical. So things like a tiger attack or the weather changing and needing to protect our food source. Very tangible, real threats where it was really easy to see, okay, if this weather system is coming in, we need to do X, Y, and Z to be able to protect our food source. The threats that we experience now are very intangible. So this is the level of notifications that you get. This is money stress. This is work stress. This is friend stress. This is you have autoimmune disease, whatever it is. It is constant and it is intangible. So this mismatch of your physiology, your biology with the type of threats that exist in today's world cause this weird sort of push and pull tension. There's this push, there's this drive to make a decision, to figure out what it is that will get rid of this threat. You can fight or run away from it. But because the threat is not tangible, it is not physical most of the time, then you're kind of stuck in this, well, what do I do then? And all your body wants to do in this moment is to ensure you survive by making a decision, yet it is not equipped to make a decision for the type of threat that you're experiencing. I'm going to make a part 2 to break down the situation-specific strategies we can use, as well as overall nervous system regulation tips, because there's a lot to go over with this.
Can I express my frustration again? Why I feel like we're missing the core, like what is the cause? It's like if you take a cell phone and you say, you know how sometimes your cell phone, somebody calls, a spam caller calls you and it really frustrates you. Let me tell you how you can get rid of that. Like, okay, but like, what's the core cause of these issues, these stress related issues? We're talking about symptoms still, right? Or I guess stimulus response, but what is the real stimulus? What's the feeling of inadequacy?
I think the stimulus is different now than it would have been millions of years ago. We're not getting chased by tigers. We have these other threats. Sometimes we perceive them as existential, but they're non-tangible. You can't run away from the tiger.
In Buddhist monk, what is the core? It's deep in your psyche. Why does that bother you? Who cares?
Well, isn't that what you're saying, Louis? The point of cognitive behavioral therapy is to get at that. Like to get at the root of those things.
That's right. Yeah. And knowledge is power, understanding that we may have these tendencies, perhaps from an evolutionary level, that's just how humans are. The idea is it's supposed to empower you to realize that I might be feeling like this is irrational, or maybe what I am feeling is irrational. I don't have to feel that. I'm making it worse on myself. And a lot of it comes down to attitude and stuff too, right? If you wake up every day and tell yourself today is going to be a shitty day, it's probably going to be a shitty day, right? I believe we have the ability to influence that. But is there any connection to our actual physiology that now we're dealing with different threats with the society and culture we have that we've never really had to before? And that's why some of us struggle.
Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely multifaceted, like everything with humans. It's what we that's why anthropology has so many damn subfields, is because we're very complex creatures and we need to break it down in all these different parts. And yeah, evolutionary psychology comes into play. The changes in our environment come into play. The way we interact with each other, the lack of family cohesion, moving, changing, fast-paced life, expectations on us, even inherent conflicts in those expectations. One that I talked about just the other day in class with regard to cultural knowledge and expected norms is that we're expected to go to work and make a lot of money, but we're also expected to take care of our families and spend time with them and nurture them. Those two are in complete opposite ends of the spectrum, but we're supposed to do both really well all the time. And it's hard to circle that square because we're being pulled in all these different directions. So I don't know. Again, I don't think we can boil it down to one thing. Clearly, there is a physiological component because the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors that are prescribed to people with anxiety and depression work in some people, they don't work in others. Some people are fine with the side effects. You and I were not, and sought other solutions that fortunately I think we could both agree have been working to some extent, and that's nice. Something that was helpful for me too, not to keep harping on, I guess it's only the second time I've mentioned it, so it's not harping, but Eckhart Tolle's book Now, even though now doesn't exist in the context of like how time exists, it's almost like this book is therapy in a way that it teaches you to take yourself out of the moment, and the default mode network's going and you're ruminating on these things. It's the middle of the night. Anxiety is just bringing out things from 20 years ago. And you're thinking about this. It's like, why am I thinking about it? But just make yourself present. Focus on that moment. Focus on now. What's important now? You're laying in bed. You're not being chased by tigers. Shut the fuck up. Like just focus on what's going on right now.
Yeah.
There isn't a threat. There isn't a threat.
Yeah.
Physiologically, mentally, all of it. And if there is a threat, deal with that now, overcome it, and then move on. But our brains aren't doing that. They're ruminating on things that oftentimes don't need to be. But if you do pull yourself away from the environment, almost have an out-of-body experience, it's really been super helpful for my mental health, just personally speaking.
Yeah, catastrophizing it. We have a tendency to think the absolute worst, like, oh my God, what if I get fired? Well, if I get fired, I'm going to lose my house, and then my wife is going to leave me, and then I'm going to be homeless on the street. And we role play all this stuff that is likely never going to happen. And it's the biggest catastrophe all the time. And you ruminate, you get stuck in these patterns, and that's what makes it hard to get out of, right?
Mm-hmm, for sure. And we all do it. Everybody does it. Like, I think anxiety and depression isn't even something that we need to diagnose. We all have it. If you're alive today, you have anxiety and depression in some form. It's just a sliding scale. It's worse. Right. It's maybe, chronic in certain people, pathological in others, but everybody has some form of it.
So it's funny. I didn't mention it, but I have severe anxiety as well, just like you guys, but I also have a nice cherry on top of my other mental illnesses. Is ADHD, which if you don't know, is that after watching
dyslexia. I can also add dyslexia to the ADHD and anxiety and depression.
So I'm not fully dyslexic, but this is really weird. There are times where I will literally read something, and for some reason in my head, I read it in my mind. I read it word for word, but I will have mixed up where certain words were, which changes the entire meaning of a thing. So it's kind of dyslexia, but not exactly where it's all backwards. It's just jumbled. Things are jumbled for some reason. I read in chunks too, which doesn't help. But I also have different methods for, kind of like you, different methods for feeling less stressful. But I will say this: when it comes to this idea of stress, what if we were to create a society, right, that you can't eliminate stress because we need it in order to, exercise, having challenges. Your brain needs some kind of a positive stress, things that challenge you through stress to push past the threshold that you have now, which essentially makes you a stronger human being and ultimately lets you live longer. So for a better quality of life, you have to have challenges. But in terms of like the kinds of stress that cause anxiety and these mental illnesses that we discussed and many others, what kind of society could you envision? Or even, and I mentioned this before in a previous conversation, but what kind of a system may work to better fit the true, I guess, well-being of humanity?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I've thought about this a lot. Obviously, as someone who studies potentially the future, it does seem like we're moving toward a future in which there's an elevated consciousness and a hive mind
Hmm,
consciousness.
interesting.
And once, if we, and when, I would argue when I've come to understand slash believe, depending on various interpretations, that we are in fact moving in that direction. And once we achieve that, I strongly think all of these things we're talking about now will just disappear. A lot of it has to do with, in sociology, they call it dramaturgical analysis, where we constantly
Hmm,
feel like we're on stage and we're being watched and judged, which we are. Um, but we interpret ourselves based on how we interpret people's views of us up on that stage. We're looking at them, we're gauging their reactions. We think, oh, they hate me, oh, they love me. Obviously, it changes day to day, but we base our interpretation of self, ego, on that. If we do elevate to the point where we have a shared mind, which I do think is where we're going, then all of that disappears. We're all one. Ego disappears. A lot
hmm.
of the problems we have today, the wars, the conflicts, even interpersonal conflicts, are driven by ego. And once ego dissolves, what's left? What's left to fight about?
Hmm.
Well said. So
Diana, oh, sorry, there was a
go
moment.
ahead. I want to ask him about some UAP stuff because I know
Yeah,
that's a huge chunk of
that.
brain that we haven't got to yet. But you go ahead, Marquise. You're more than welcome to ask another question related to evolution.
So Diana Pasulka mentioned the idea of artificial intelligence, and I got it. I've only seen the interview one time. She recently did an interview where she said that she either spoke to someone or discovered through her research that there's a belief in in some circles, which, by the way, she's very well connected. If you don't know Diana Pasulka, I know you do, but you guys do. But I mean, audience, you got to look at this lady. She's amazing. Um, she said that she has discovered this idea that artificial intelligence could be a conduit for a non-human intelligence to kind of, coexist with us. That we may be creating essentially an embodiment or a vessel or some intelligence to embody, and it could lead to a completely different civilization. This, you mentioned about hive mind, which brought me to this idea, the idea that we've been told, and we're going to get, this is the interesting half here, y'all. The idea that these non-human intelligences, they may be hive-minded, they may be a unified mind in some sense, like bees, or so forth, something like that. I just wanted to talk. I didn't have a question.
Yeah, I agree. And AI is clearly an important part of what we are today, and it's obviously going to be more
Yeah.
important in the future. And how do those overlap? It'll be interesting to see. Clearly, if these are future humans coming back, to try to give you a little segue here, Louis, because you said you want to talk about UFOs. If they are future humans coming back, clearly they're using AI. There's the Pascagoula case with Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, where there's robots that come and take them, but then on board they see
Yeah,
humans,
yeah.
fully modern humans, just like us. There's a lot of indications that some of these short grays are potentially biologically engineered. There's that weird Reddit post where they sort of,
Thank you for
alluded to that,
Yep.
and who knows if that's true or not, but we should consider that potentially, because it seemed like they kind of knew what they were talking about, and there may be some legitimacy. But when people come out anonymously, you can't vet them, so it
Well,
should be taken with a
biologists
grain of
were
salt.
Gary Nolan, the microbiologist, he said that you should, like, there should be a team of academics to look at that Reddit post.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
there was some credence to that, apparently, by some pretty well respected microbiologists. They said it was legit.
Yeah. Yeah,
in
and
terms of the science.
and it just makes sense. Like, we're already doing it. We're already using CRISPR. And something that was weird to me is that I started to pay attention to this and think about this, and then you'll see, like what was it, the last Guardians of the Galaxy movie, where the entire ship was biologically engineered. It was a biological organism. And it's like, is that seeding us? Is that trying to help shift the zeitgeist in this direction? And it also just makes sense on a mechanical level. Like, you get past having to oil parts or mechanical things breaking down in some sort of automaton that's driven by gears and sprockets, and you move to something that you can create with the biological form. And John Ramirez talking about how the big secret about Roswell isn't the craft, it's the fact that they had human DNA and all the questions that arise from that. So I absolutely think we'll do it. And I think it will happen in association with AI, as Diana mentioned as well.
And you've authored, and I love the fact that you're a brilliant scientist and you also believe in UFOs, aliens, non-human intelligence.
No. I don't use the word belief. It's not a belief system. It's an evidence-based system.
Very good. Very good.
Respect,
and I want to show your books here. So the first was Identified Flying Objects.
It's awesome, by the way.
I love the evolutionary pics on the front of, the ape to the guy on the phone.
It's a caricature too. I obviously got shit for this because, we know that evolution didn't happen like boom, 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 boom. There's introgression. There's things happening. You can't represent the complexity of our family tree in 2 dimensions. So in the same way that you go to the carnival and you get a caricature of you made by a really amazing artist. It's crazy to me that they can do these things and make it look like you in a funny way too. Like, that's what it is. It's the simplification of this process. But yes, I know, for all the backlash, I know that it's not actually how evolution worked.
There's not enough room on the page to do the.
Not enough room on the page, and who's going to look at that? Like, it's a book cover. It's a 3-dimensional, like, family
4 million
diagram or something. Like, how the fuck was I supposed to do that? I'm conveying an idea in the simplest form. Yes. Thank you very fucking much.
And you're better. This won't get you in as much trouble because there's no alien pictures on it. But the extra-tempestrial model is absolutely fascinating. The future human theory. And if anybody's
people talk
not
about you, by the way, all over the place.
Yeah, tell us, what is the extra-tempestrial model?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's us from the future coming back through time. The word itself, the etymology of that is that I took the Latin root ter, which is in extraterrestrial, which means earth, so outside of earth, and snuck in temp, which is time, temp. I don't know why I pronounced that in the French version, because that's also the word for time in French. And stuck that in there to mean outside of time, to suggest to keep the conventional knowledge of extraterrestrial, but then allude to the fact that they are likely us from the future. And we have a long history on this planet. We know we're here. It's not making assumptions about what may or may not be outside of this planet. We know we're here. We know we've had a long evolutionary history, both technologically, culturally, and biologically, as we've talked about throughout this episode. So it's very likely that if these things continue, our technology will get more advanced. Our biology will change. We're likely to still have bigger, wider heads, smaller faces, dip into that higher level consciousness, telepathic communication. It's sort of where we're headed based on past trends. So it's not speculative in the sense that I'm saying this is going to happen and that's going to happen. It's just looking at these entities associated with these craft, observing them. It's observational research, which is a big part of what we do in anthropology, and saying there's a connection here and we should take that seriously.
And it's amazing that there's a physical basis behind this, like the study in sort of the areas like ocular, orbital, mid-facial, cranial. Our heads are getting bigger, our jaws are getting smaller. People have wisdom tooth issues because our jaws are shrinking. Well, fast forward 1,000, million, whatever the number is, that continues. And maybe the slender arms and everything we associate with the typical gray, not an AI biologic one, but like a tall gray or a sentient living being, maybe that is in fact us.
Yeah. And I like to point out too, if in the same way that we can talk about panspermia and how that passes the buck, if we talk about how these biologics, these droids, whatever we want to call them, are created, the question then becomes, who made them? Who created them? And the same way we make robots today, Boston Dynamics and all of these companies in our own image, they're likely doing the same thing. And I got asked recently, like, well, why not make them look like us? Or do they look kind of like us because they're supposed to sort of grease the wheels and allow for more intimate contact, but then they don't look exactly like us. Some do, but they're human. They have bathrooms, they have bedrooms, they have kitchens on their ships, exactly like we would have. They are us. But then clearly it gets to a point in our deep evolutionary future where if they are making these things, someone is making them, and maybe they're making them in their own image. That's why they look like these grays, and there are actual grays. And I don't want to reference this as like a factual thing. It's not at all, but I'm sure a lot of your viewers have seen that interview with the gray who's having a hard time speaking because they communicate
Yeah, it's all
telepathically.
over the internet
Like there's
now.
a lot in that video that indicates it might be real. Like the shape, the craniofacial characteristics, the ocular characteristics, the facial characteristics, but how hard it is to talk because they probably haven't talked in a really long time, but they're still able to speak our language. And you know, and it's not just that one, like the skinny Bob thing, and there's all of these images, these videos that it would be hard to make those with no knowledge. And in my first book, I got some backlash for this because I talked about the alien autopsy video. Of course, it's fake. I know it's fake. I acknowledge that in the book. But if they are creating an alien autopsy completely out of the blue to entertain people, why make it exactly like we would look in the future?
Oh man, there's so many. I'm gonna try to, because I do this all the time. Let's get the ADHD calming down.
Overactive
So,
brain, I think, is
oh
what
man,
we
it's
call it. I
way
got it
too.
too, brother. I feel you.
So there's a guy who's been going around making the rounds over the last few months. John Stewart. He's like a libertarian, I believe. He's running as a libertarian. Like he's a politician of some kind. But he was on the Richard Dillon show, and he was talking about again that alien interview tape. And I think not in that interview, but in one of the interviews he did recently, he mentioned the idea that it may not be real, that it may be a recreation of an actual event. But either way, there were some things in that video he said he claimed were, according to the doctors he talked to. I feel like there's a lot he can't say. And I feel like we're probably going to find out something about that video. I mean, one way or another, we'll find out the truth. But when you mentioned about the idea that they could be us in the future, obviously, I have a very different idea about this, and I want to know your thoughts on people like Jacques Vallée. The idea that he mentions about the phenomena could be multiple different things, or it could be one intelligence manifesting itself in multiple different ways. Something that this idea that I've collected was that there may be an intelligence of which we've never seen, that just can't like directly interact with us, that's creating these experiences, whether they be physical or not, like to interact with us for some purpose. To his point, he says it's a control mechanism.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely a component of it. The trickster element as well, John Keel, and there. So, if I had to approach this from an extra-tempestrial viewpoint, what I would argue is that this is going to start happening soon. I feel like this disclosure process is intimately related to our knowledge that will eventually become the very distant future. And all of them, if that does happen, all of them innately become one. If we have a moment, let's say if we have a moment in time in our relative future where we have broad time travel across different periods, all information at all points is available. My friend Hussein Ali Agrama calls it like a technological singularity or something like that, because once we know this, and if this is time travel, of course, that's a very important thing to preface this with. If this is time travelers from the future, once we reach that point where there's broad acknowledgement of it and we can interact, and I think it's already happening with certain segments of
You
our
think
government.
open contact is in the future?
I think it's already happening. Like people like Terry Lovelace that describe modern men in modern military garb working amongst small grays, tall grays, like all these different forms, hybrids. It might already be happening, and it sounds insane to say that, and I'm aware of that. But once the human population as a whole is aware of that, and we can interact globally and intertemporally, all information from all times become one. And that changes everything. And not just and that's disruptive too. And I could see why they would not want that to happen. But I do feel like we're inching toward it. And I don't think it's us doing it. I think the visitors are pulling us there because that is inevitable. That is what's always happened in their past. We're not just talking about our future and what could happen. Like this is somebody else's past, and maybe deep past. And these ones that might be coming from the deep future are, I don't know. There's a lot to consider in this, and I'm kind of getting off track. I'm going in a lot of different directions. I'll say this, that I think actually I won't, because I forgot the question. I never do that, but I forgot what we were talking about. And most people would say, "Can we cut this part out?" But I'm going to be honest. Like,
no, you made brilliant points.
I forgot what the hell I was talking about.
What I took out of what you just said,
I took myself this way, and I couldn't get back. I'm sorry.
One thing that you said that was brilliant is if it's our future and it's them coming back, it is therefore their past.
Yeah,
and I never thought of it like that before. Their past is our future.
They already know everything that's happened, and it's easy to forget that. But I would like to get back to what Marquis said, because I honestly, and you don't have to cut this out. Like, I obviously,
we don't edit anything, brother.
If I have an ego, I'd be like, "Oh, cut this out." But I rarely forget what the hell the starting point was, but I couldn't get back to it. I'll own that.
Well, we're even because the last panel we did, I was listening to you talk. You were so deep and I was so engrossed. And then the question came to me right after. And I'm like, I don't know where the hell we're at. I just listening to Mike, man.
I remember that. I remember that.
Yeah. Well, so we're even now.
Well, Marquis, bring us back. Bring us back.
Yeah. So first of all, just so you know, I butchered that name earlier, so I don't feel as bad.
We've all got something. We've all got dirty little secrets on this one.
A little bit. So I do want to say, in your defense, and this is for the audience, of course, that in case you don't know, there was an intelligence guy named David Grush. It's all over the news, who spoke in front of Congress about the idea that there may be, and he spoke to Ross Coulthart, who's an Australian journalist, about the idea, and this is according to his investigation, by the way, within the government, within the IC, the intelligence community, that there may be these non-human intelligences that have interacted with us, humanity. And obviously that would be like the people that represent us, the military or the government or whatever. This isn't just something, I mean, again, this is an interesting thing to say, because now we're hearing about what a lot of us who've been researching UFOs and so forth have heard about for decades being talked about in the halls of Congress. And there are people like Rep. Luna and Tim Burchett and others and Mike Turner who are like trying to get what's going on here. So what you're mentioning now, I feel like you're a pioneer, because people like you have been talking about this for a while. And now that it's becoming a part of congressional hearings, I think the world is going to become more and more aware of people like you, pioneers who've been talking about this and written books about it and have really put a lot of legwork into figuring out what the heck is going on. Like, what's going on? What's really going on?
Yeah, is that a question? I feel like it was.
I was just blowing your horn, bro. Because
I appreciate that. I mean, the way you said that is sort of a euphemism, so I'm not sure how to react. I'll thank you either way for the horn blowing. But I don't know. I got to the point where I stopped looking at it as an individual at all. I did a TV show. I imagine it'll be coming out pretty soon. Pretty cool collaboration between a couple of different networks for global distribution. And the executive producer was actually the one that interviewed me. You always expect to get sort of the organizing producer or someone lower down, but they brought in the executive producer, starts asking all these questions. When it comes out, you'll see why I was a little skeptical about this. They were the most informed questions ever. Like, really, really good questions where they did their homework. And he's telling me they interviewed all these other people and they're really trying to make a good thing. At the very end, he said, I want the UFO community to be proud of this, which is very hard to do. But he did the same thing. He's like talking about, yeah, you're such a pioneer. You did all of these things. I don't see it that way at all. I was tasked to do this at age 8, and I've been doing it, but it's not an individual thing. There's no individualism in this. And people who see it that way are just, they're chasing something that's not there. This is a community effort, and a lot of people view it that way, and that's how we've moved forward. Not because of anything I've done. Like, yeah, I stuck my neck out there as an individual, especially at my institution, because I do have to go to work. I do have to interact on panels and, you know, committees and stuff. But it's not me. It's us. We're all doing this. I'm sure you both feel the same way. There's some drive that we have, and I did a interview with Jesse Michaels a couple times over the last year, and it just came out a few days ago. And all these people reaching out to me has indicated that even more. Like, we're all involved in this in ways that we don't yet understand. This drive that we have to talk about this and to make podcasts and have people on and to have these conversations, there's something way deeper going on there that I think it's going to take some time to figure out. And I do think it's part of this whole process that's taking place in Congress, with Grush, with Arrow, with, you know, well, maybe not Arrow, OSAP.
Definitely not Arrow.
Definitely not Arrow. I know I said it, and I'm like, shit.
Well,
definitely not Arrow.
There's new leadership, so we'll see what happens with the new figure.
Yeah,
we'll
you know, and maybe it's a top-down thing. I doubt it. They're probably just an arm of the military-industrial complex, but yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't see myself in this at all. So it's nice of you to say that. But and this executive producer was saying the same thing. It was just like walking past me. You know, I don't hear it because it's not me. It's all of us. We're all doing this together, and it's a grassroots movement. It's a big push forward, and it's so great to see things happening. And I hope it continues.
Have you had any experiences yourself? If you don't want to answer that, you don't have to. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I have that, and it's definitely ramped up. Like, I talked about the one when I was 8 years old. I've come to understand that as a moment of conscious precognition. And when I used to describe it to people back in like 2018, 2019, my first book came out, it was people would use the word download, and I was like, nah, I don't think so. And now it's very obvious it was. I've met a lot of people who have had very similar experiences, and it was. I don't know why, but I've really been averse to that terminology for a long time, almost because it felt cosmic, or I don't know. Like, it was something I didn't understand. I was raised in a very reductionist, materialist worldview, and especially at that time, like, my first book is very dense, hard science, materialist perspective, and that's who I was at that time. I had to write it like that. I wasn't pretending. That's how I thought. And as time went on, I came to understand that yeah, there's a lot of crazy cosmic shit happening too, and obviously people have been aware of that for centuries, millennia. It's something that I wasn't familiar with, but it's been forced into my wheelhouse all of a sudden.
Common. Most people are usually thrown into those kind of things. I mean, I have a completely different perspective when I look at, and I think we all feel like our opinions are informed by not just our experience, but what we believe is the correct interpretation of those experiences, right? So for me, I think that there is a phenomena that is quite powerful, and when I mean the true essence of what power is. You think that power is having the bigger gun, but imagine if you didn't have to have anything and you were just, I mean, you couldn't be, hindered by whatever you'd like to do or whatever, or stopped by the lack of intelligence or whatever. There's an intelligence that is far superior than us that's been here allegedly. I mean, there are plenty of civilizations that claim that they were gods and they came from the sky and they had star maps that they shouldn't have had because they didn't have the technology to observe the cosmos. Like, it's clear that something has been going on here, right? obviously things are kind of coming out now in our society today. But what I want to know is, at least from your perspective, do you think, because it sounds like you don't have a negative perspective about the phenomenon. I don't think that it's all negative. I do think that what's interacting with us is concerning.
Some of it, yes. I think source consciousness is love. But if there is, and I do believe, now should I use the B word again? There is evidence to suggest that some of them are future humans, and not all of them clearly are benevolent. And I talked about this many times. I heard David Grush talk about it, also with Jesse Michaels, that why would they be? Why would they all be benevolent? A lot are malevolent, or maybe they're just perceived as that because they're doing things to us that isn't cool. Touching us in our no-no squares and taking semen and putting fetuses inside of us. Like, all of this stuff would be seen as negative, and it is to us as individuals. But if we look beyond that, and I detail the case of Jerry in my second book, The Extra-Tempestrial Model, and her story is really fascinating. John Mack covered this. It was one of John Mack's patients, and she had upwards of 50 instances of that happening to her, where she's violated in that way. Fetuses are put in, taken out, put in. She's a broodmare for these future humans, as I would argue, because they're reproducing with us or using us in that context, which indicates that they are the same species based on the biological classification of species concept. But she eventually gets to the point in her life where she's like, what the hell's going on? This sucked, but I'm part of this. And that's amazing. I'm part of something bigger than me, bigger than anything that I could possibly understand. And they would tell her this, and I don't think it's just like medicine. I think they're telling her these things because it's true. There's a new beginning. There's a new birth of humanity. And she's a part of birthing that. And she felt that. She really sensed that in them and their presence. So I think that's a really important example, because it's both. It's like, yes, these things are bad if I just think about it in the context of me, but maybe they're good if I think about it in the context of the whole of humanity. So I don't know, maybe there's that individual versus societal disconnect. Obviously, some people do have bad experiences, but the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation study also shows us, the free study, that 85% of people who interacted with human-looking forms did have a positive experience and even wanted more. Like Whitley Strieber is a great example. He felt like he was raped when he was anally probed, the experience he describes in his first book, Communion. In his book that he co-authored with Jeffrey Kripal called The Supernatural, he's begging for them to come back. He has an amazing sexual experience that he feels bad about because his wife, Anne, he's very deeply in love with. But it wasn't even that sexual experience. It was just the feeling that he got from interacting with their consciousness that overwhelmed him. And he wanted more of that. And I do think that's where we're going as humanity, in the direction of the future. And I think that's positive overall, even if it does negatively affect certain people.
I'll have to talk to you at a separate time. I don't want to take up Louis' question here, but at some point I have a few follow-up questions about that. So we'll be in touch after.
We'll do it on a subsequent episode, because we're running up an hour 42 here. I do want to give Mike a chance to promote. If people want to learn more about you or follow you, where can they learn more about the brilliant Michael Paul Masters?
Well, I mean, I have a website. Nobody goes to it. I don't really update it very much, but it's michaelpmasters.com. I do put events up there. Like, I'm giving a talk in New York City in a few weeks, December 9th, I think it is. The Inquirer Anomalous event put on by Jay and Leslie Kane, and Engage in the Phenomenon. I'll remember his name. Just a second. Give me a second. James?
Yeah, James.
Mendeley,
James.
I believe.
Yep,
yeah.
James. Yeah. He's a really nice guy, man.
Yeah,
Really
absolutely. There's a few people from the very beginning that I interacted with in Twitter, mostly before it became UFO Twitter and kind of got weird. He was one of them. Dan Zetterstrom, the Zignal. Like, there's so many people from the beginning that like cared to pay attention to what I was saying. And I really respect that. He was definitely one of them. Which is funny that his name was the one that I had the hardest time coming up with. But a lot of people also were sort of anonymous for a long time. I mean, Dan too. He ended up doing the cover of my last book along with Olaf Rockner. But they were behind pseudonyms for a while, and a lot of people were, because obviously it's cool that things have changed to the point that people are starting to come out as themselves and can be. It's a beautiful progression that we've seen. But yeah, so my books are on wherever you get books. That'll be a fun talk in New York. I think the in-person tickets are sold out, but the online tickets are still available. But I was told that those are running out too. So if people want to see that, then definitely get involved. I think I'm done writing books for a while. It's a lot of work.
LGBT, man. No, you can't. It's terrible. It's terrible.
But I am collaborating with some really cool guys at Harvard and St. Andrews in the UK, and a prominent journalist as well on some academic papers, which I had to step away from during COVID. It kind of derailed a lot of what we do in academia because we couldn't carry out studies in the same way, and it took a hit, and I never really got back into it. I've been focusing on the UFO stuff, which has been fun too. But we're doing some academic papers. It combines both. We're doing some journal submissions about various things related to the UFO phenomenon, and just submitted one last week actually for peer review. So yeah, there's things going on. I think the whole point of all of this is the fact that we just need to keep talking about it. So I very much appreciate what you two fellas are doing as well, because where are we if we can't talk about the crazy shit happening in the world? We all should be. I think we'll move a lot farther and faster toward that idyllic future if we just keep talking.
Absolutely. Very well said. Marquise, final thought to you, brother.
It's really good to talk to you, man. I've been I should have texted you, but I didn't. There's a lot of things going on. We'll talk about that sometime then. Good stuff, by the way, not bad stuff. But it was really nice talking to you, man.
You too.
I like personally.
Always a
not
pleasure.
Just,
I did also send Dave a screenshot as we were talking. Told him we were talking about him, and all good things though. All good things. Well, that was how
be clear about what we're saying, okay?
I don't. But that's how I met you, Marquise, and Louis.
Yeah,
I think that was one of the first times I'd been on your show before that, but no, I think Dave is a great guy too. So it was. I had to send him a little.
Yeah, I know. I had a great time at SR, man. That was a lot of fun. I met a lot of. I met
fun.
You. So.
And we don't begrudge. We don't begrudge anybody we used to work with. We're doing our own thing. We're having a blast. We've used our previous show experience to find out what we like, what we don't like. We've trimmed the fat, and we do our own thing. And we're super happy doing it. So, you're welcome here anytime.
I was in a band for 10 years, and I know probably better than most just how crazy the dynamic can get when you're trying to do something productive. But what's great about it, like you said, it's always just what comes next. How do we get better at everything? That's right, yeah. And you learn from all of it. So everything. Onward. Yeah.
And the topics that I felt was limited. I didn't want to just talk about UFOs and aliens. Like, there are much bigger implications if that is in fact true. Let's look at it from a science point of view. Who's doing science? Are they following the scientific method? So this is an expansion of that topic to include things like AI and consciousness and everything else, because I don't believe it is just limited to visitations or non-human intelligence. I think by understanding ourselves, like you said, it's that hive mind. If we can all collectively raise our consciousness or figure out how to access that realm, we all get better, and that information just flows. We become conduits. So That's
Yeah.
the purpose of our show. It's commercial free. We're not making money off of this. We do enjoy a little support though, and you can check out our Quantum Club, which is on our description in the link below. $5 a
Yeah.
month. We give you, and we record a mini episode after every episode.
Yeah.
So
It's a little
for all the
unfiltered,
episodes
so
we
you know.
have, there's
Yeah.
equal number of them for our Patreon subscribers. So
Yeah.
all the
That's
help is
awesome.
supported. Yeah, and people can check us out on the UnX network on Sunday nights as well. That's 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 Eastern. And these episodes come out Thursday evenings, and we are live in the chat rooms. Again, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and the UnX network. So with that, I do want to say a big thank you, Mike. Appreciate your time as always, brother. Love to have you back again.
Absolutely.
And we wish
Anytime.
you, continued success, and just keep doing what you're doing. Keep being that humble guy we love you for, and we'll see you again in the future.
Yeah,
All
man.
right. Thanks, fellas. Great talking to you.
Awesome.
Same
And
here.
with that, we will bring today's show to a close. Again, thanks to Mike Masters, my co-host Marquise Williams, and myself, Louis Borges. We'd like you all to come see us again next week. Get us on your regular schedule and reach out to us. We love hearing from you. We respond to you all. So take care of each other, and we'll see you again next week.